Hi, I'm Andy Schmuckler, host of a website and a video series, A Better Human Story. .org on the web, and here we are here. I'm a guy who's been driven for 54 years by a sense that I had an integrative picture about our situation as a species that put a lot of important things in a very importantly different light. And it could actually improve our chances as a species of surviving for the long haul on this planet, meaning getting our act together versus destroying ourselves. So that's been the belief. And I usually come up here, hoping that I'm going to be able to persuade viewers that this is something that needs to be checked out. I've been driven by that since a particular experience in August of 1970, and it's only grown, and that's what drives me. What I am trying to show in my Better Human Story is something, the foundational idea of which blew me away when I saw it. I mean, it just changed the course of my life. And I always imagined that it would have a similar impact on the rest of the world if I could communicate it. And then that thing came out, and it got some significant attention. But then the idea disappeared. So came out in 1984, got a full page. Anyway, I'm just going to ask you to go with me as I assume that my feeling about this Better Human Story and its potential beneficial impact is a realistic assessment. And then ask the question, why is it that a guy, me, who works his ass off to do the best job he can do, to show something that has profound implications, if it were true, and then to claim to prove virtually, logically, that it's got to be pretty true. And the profound implications, I just imagined that the world was going to take a look at it, be compelled by a compelling argument to adopt it, and absorb that into our perspective, that we look at where we are as a species and what we got to do. I never imagined happening what happened, which is it got out there, feature in Esquire magazine, prize from a scholarly society, International Society for Political Psychology. And then by the early 90s, it had never existed. I mean, I had never imagined that. I mean, I could imagine people trying to refute it, or I was hoping they would celebrate it, but just to sort of have it be put out there, this thing that had blown me, my whole life onto a different course, and then have it be ignored without anybody ever having not only not refuted it, but really laying a glove on it. I mean, it was untouched. It was like it had stepped out into the ring and issued its challenges to all comers. And then there was no fight. The ring got empty. So I asked myself, I've been asking myself for, it is a little over 30 years now, since it became clear that the thing that I had felt was my life mission to make as good as I could and put it out into the world for other people to see had simply been ignored. And so I asked myself, how did that happen? Not refuted. I mean, I could imagine, if the world, if it could say, well, this guy went out there on the stage and made all these claims, and then people show how ridiculous they were. I mean, the media know how to expose the ridiculous claims these days, since we get exposed to so many. But no, it hadn't been, nobody laid a glove on it. It still had enormous implications if it were accepted to be true. It would put into a different light such things as, how should we understand what we are by nature? Why has the course of human history last 10,000 years been the way it has? What are we challenged to do as a species who created civilization and might bring down the whole system of life on Earth if we're too careless? Those questions get illuminated differently. Made that kind of claim, and then the world just let it sit there. So I ask myself, and I have been asking myself, what does that mean? At first, I took it rather personally, and I still take it. I take it damn personally still. I don't want to kid myself. But there's a way in which I think it's a sign of what there's a market for and what there isn't. If our civilization was interested in something that did what I claimed it to do, that even if my effort failed to satisfy the need for a big picture view that makes sense and illuminates things, there would be some bodies of thought, some ways that some human being had envisioned what's going on, that would be occupying a place in our consciousness, like a couple of systems of thought that were at play in the world in the 50s and 60s when I was getting educated. Sigmund Freud and Karl Marx, they were out there. They were people who were paying attention to the perspectives that they offered to understand major dynamics of what goes on in the human world. Not the same system in Freud as in Marx. Both of them turned out to have important flaws. Nonetheless, our society had a space in it, evidently, for some kind of big picture perspective on civilization. So that's the kind of thing that I was offering, and I still am offering. And I like what I've got better than Marx and Freud, but you check it out and decide for yourself. I've been thinking about the implications of the fact that there is in our culture right now nothing in that category of big picture view, providing an illuminating perspective on what unfolds in the human world. And in Freud's case, all those symbols and psychological mechanisms. In Marx's case, the class struggle and the evolving structure of civilized societies in history and all that stuff. Different levels, but nobody. Marx isn't what used to be, still hangs around. Freud isn't what Freud used to be, and he still hangs around. But there's nobody that's occupying a position. And can it be the case that out of all the intelligent people living in our world and with access to education and the pursuit of articulating their visions of the world, that there isn't anybody out there that's got something that really deserves at least as much as Freud or Marx deserves. So if there's nothing out there, that tells me that the state of consciousness of our civilization is one that's not in the market for that. And that corresponds, by the way, with a lot of experience I've had interacting with people on the web since I became a blogger in 2005, which is, I know that there are few people in our thought world, at least as far as I've been able to make content, and I have from in a variety of ways, that are really looking for some way of seeing things whole. And I've been asking myself, what does that signify? My sense, I'm not an intellectual historian, but my sense is that if you go back to, the thought of, say, the last decades of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century, that the world of thought was concerned with big questions. And since then, for a variety of reasons, the quest for big answers to big questions disappears from the picture, more or less. I mean, if you look at the major thinkers, American like Veblen and Peirce, but more in Germany and in France, Durkheim and some of the German theorists of history, you get a sense that they were looking to see what the big picture was. And so out of that come people like Freud and Marx to do what they're capable of doing. And then the society absorbed those things and used them to, I don't know how much good effect and bad effect. I mean, they were both mixed pictures. Maybe good effect, that we are more conscious of the exploitation of people who have less power because of Marx. Maybe for the better because we're still aware that we aren't always aware of the things that drive us to do what we do, that there are other dimensions besides the conscious one. Those are enriching ideas that, anyway, I think that the fragmentation of our thinking is represented and also reinforced by how academic fields become ever more broken down into tinier and tinier pieces. When I first got the idea that changed my life, I saw things very much in terms that was presented in a book called The Broken Mirror, which was about how our understanding of the world had become disintegrated. I think the guy's name was Lloyd Matson or something. He wrote about academia and the devolution into specializations. The center will not hold. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. There's a loss of contact with the big questions and the big answers. I kind of have wondered if people are not into seeing things whole, what is it that they see is one question. And the answer is, for example, there's a spectrum that runs from really getting into the news of the day to out to my better human story about the underlying dynamic that has that challenges the civilization creating creature. From concrete to abstract. And I think we've become very concrete. I think what I encounter in the world where I'm able to get to is people who show a lot of intelligence in understanding the day-to-day and the blow-by-blow. On daily costs, for example, there's discussion at a very respectable level of the ins and outs of what's going on, and an analysis that is not just of the moment, but of the greater time. There's a lot that's illuminating, but brought by intelligent people who are into understanding what's going on in our political battle. My experience is that I have good standing with that group when I talk about this particular immediate American battle. But the more I also present the larger picture of what our battle is a part of and the outgrowth of, I don't get the attention to that part. I've been struck by that over the years. I keep on trying to put a spike down in the concrete world and then belay down into the fundamental level of the big picture that people really need to see to understand what our situation is. And I think, I don't know what that's about. Why, say, Americans in the early part of the 20th century were people who were looking for big pictures, and people in the early parts of this century and the end of the previous century are not looking for such a way of understanding the big picture. One thing is, I think that people don't think there is such a thing as a big picture that would illuminate everything well. I mean, maybe there's a cultural process of disillusionment because, well, we had Freud, we had Marx, and we had the 20th century. They didn't save us. It's not even clear that they helped save us. In Marx's case, he became an instrument of something that was pretty closely aligned with evil. At least in the Cold War, if one side's going to be the good side, it wasn't the one inspired by Marx. And with Freud, I don't know. It seems to me that we've lost the greatest gift that he gave us, which is really a sense that we got to tune in on the unconscious level in order to understand what's going on. It seems to me that the psychology that we operate by now when we try to understand why people are doing what they're doing is very superficial, and that Freud pointed toward depths, however well or ill he mapped them. He pointed toward depths that we are not necessarily masters in our own house, that we are creatures in which there are unresolved conflicts and difficulties, and sometimes things get broken within us, and we should become aware of that brokenness. I think that he misunderstood the nature and causes of that brokenness. That's what this is a refutation of Freud's civilization and its discontents. But that's a whole nother story. Our consciousness of these times maybe doesn't believe that there's, maybe we're processing the failure of ideology, say, an intellectual system that provides an illuminating perspective on what goes on in the human world. And you can grade any of them to any extent, what they achieve, what they get wrong. But if you don't believe that you can get that because nothing has done it, the ones that claim to do it before failed. Maybe if that's what's, I don't know if that's what's going on. But I do know that there's something that I've put out there that I've basically guaranteed that if you're interested in an understanding of I promise that you will find it delivered there. And I don't make promises lightly. And I fail, but I don't fail in, there's never somebody who goes and checks it out and comes back and says, well, I don't think you delivered. It remains essentially unrefuted. And where I fail is to get anybody to go check it out. And I infer that even if it were true, well, no, I can't infer that. I infer at least that people are not looking for something that would do that. And then we get down to the question, well, should you look for it? And I think the answer is yes, that it's not just that seeing things whole is kind of, ooh, wow. Though there is certainly the wow factor when you see how interconnected our realities are and what the nature of the drama that we're engaged in is. That's rewarding. But it is also important if we're going to be able to understand, and that's the title of that book from 2015 that I wrote, what we're up against. We are not proceeding as a species as if we understand what we're up against or understand what the challenges we have to face. We are not doing an impressive job of moving into the kind of civilization that can survive for the long haul. It's really a toss-up in my gut feeling, whether we're going to destroy ourselves or not in the next not so many generations. A toss-up. Are we acting as if it's a toss-up? I think that if we see the whole drama, it will have a lot of beneficial effects on our consciousness, both in terms of our understanding the map of the battlefield there is between the force of wholeness and the force of brokenness that emerge on us to become a part of the center of the drama of a civilization-creating creature. That's the drama. That book shows that we unleashed, inevitably, a destructive force when we became the civilization-creating creature. Inevitable, without regard to the nature of the creature. Any species that took that kind of step would be beset by a system where a destructive force had been unleashed and was having a powerful impact. All the way to understanding what we're up against, the nature of that force as it moves through the human world, and the nature of what we must align ourselves with to create a civilization that will survive for the long haul. So I think it's important to see the whole picture. I mean, for one thing, if we don't see the whole picture, if we don't see the wholeness of it, we are weakening what I would call the power of the sacred. When we see the wholeness of it, it blows us away in a how great thou art kind of a way, or in some other kind of a way which has got to do with, wow, there is some big stuff around, and we're part of it. And the stakes are as big as they could be. And in fact, the secular worldview that seems to have degenerated or devolved a bit into only seeing things in pieces and falling down on the job of integrating. The broken mirror that that book grabbed me in 1971 about how academia was had become the enemy of seeing things whole, actually. And I have my own personal history, even before that book came out. What I went through to get my PhD for doing that exposed a whole lot about American academia. So I think that there is reason to believe that there is something in our consciousness, perhaps reflected by academia. It's about seeing things in pieces. And that we really will do a better job of managing our world the more we can see things whole. When I raised this question about what's going on with my ongoing failure to get I'm out there as a carny barker. My Carner Barker line is, the ugliness we see in human history is not human nature writ large. I claim to prove that. Or does not show the real underlying inherent nature of us as human beings. And I claim I can prove that, and I try to bring people into the tent. And the Carney Barker fails. I thought it was a good line, but it's not like people are coming into the tent to take on seeing things whole. And my friend, when I was telling about this mystery that I've been wrestling with for over 30 years, he said people have a short attention span. And that got me to remembering when I went into teaching for a while at a high-class independent school in this American Southwest for a couple years. I was told by the veteran teachers, I was just a rookie, that the attention span of their students had really declined, let's say from the late 80s until when I'm talking to them, it'd be like 2002. And they said they could see that the student body had become, in some ways, less able in the ways that school teaching had been before. That the textbooks had to be in some ways dumbed down from what had been appropriate for their predecessors 15 years before. And I do wonder whether, as our civilization is developing, whether we've got a less disciplined mind, unwilling to work to achieve certain kinds of goals. For example, My Better Human Story essentially invites people to take on a multidimensional picture in which there are a variety of meaningful pieces that are integrated with each other. The idea is if you can sort of hold in your mind that this has been established in this, then the addition of this sort of shows something in depth about the way our world is put together. Moral, spiritual, the mechanisms. All these different levels, all being seen in a coherent way. They all involve, in a sense, building an understanding, which might be not congenial for someone if their attention span is as limited as some people say Americans' attention span now is. I mean, is it true that the kinds of people who used to think about things don't have a long attention span? Is it true that they aren't willing to hold things in their mind so that they can build a structure? I don't know. But that's a possibility. In any event, there is something going on about our consciousness, I would say, about the secular worldview, I would say, that has been disabling, or at least has weakened the life-serving forces in our society. I would make a case that there's a connection between that level and the failure of, say, liberal America to see the nature of the force that was emerging and to combat it from the beginning in some effective and appropriate way. What's happened to America has been a systemic failure. What's happened on the right has been one thing, but the failure on the liberal side, the secular worldview side, has been a necessary part. Had the liberal world understood the nature of what they were up against, what we're up against, back when it first started emerging in the early 1990s with Rush Limbaugh and Newt Gingrich, and then Fox News, it was visible. But you got to see the big picture to see what it is that you're looking at. In the big picture, what we can see is that a lot of major currents of American brokenness have come together to form a force of fascism that threatens to degrade pretty much everything that's good about America. That's been visible to me increasingly since the early 90s. And then full time since 2004. But liberal America did not see what was going on, and that was because there was a defect in our consciousness that didn't put the pieces together to see that what was emerging was a thing. A coherent force was taking over conservative America, the Republican Party. It didn't see that this wasn't politics as usual, and didn't see that these other guys weren't their friends across the aisle until the era of Donald Trump, when the process of empowering a force of brokenness was quite advanced. It's like the Sufi story about the guy who ignores this bug flying around it as it gets bigger and bigger until it shows that it is essentially this evil force called a genie that kills the man and blows his hut apart and escapes into the world. Well, something like that can be seen. It was visibly rising on the right, and because of a defect of consciousness, there wasn't a concept of a coherent force that is working consistently in destructive directions, which the Republican Party progressively has become over the last 30 couple years. Not the party of Reagan, much less Eisenhower. So it's a systemic problem. And the not seeing things whole meant not seeing the coherence of what was going on as racism and greed and dishonesty and cruelty and hate and fear-mongering and all those dark things that you can sometimes see at play in the human world are coming together as a coherent force. And consistently operating in the world in ways that make things more broken, that degrade the human world. To see the it of that coherence, it is a defect in our consciousness, not seeing things whole, that I think contributed importantly to the failure of liberal America, secular America, to see quickly the coherent force that was taking over the right and to combat it in a timely way. I don't think that's a function of liberalism. I think that if you went back to FDR and a lot of other people, you would find liberalism ready to take it on in the ways that were required, and it would be defeated these things in the cradle. But it's liberalism that's animated by a state of consciousness, which is too much into seeing things in pieces and not putting the pieces together to see the coherence underlying it. So it's not just that the Republican Party has become sort of destructive on this issue and has become destructive on that issue and has become destructive on this other issue, from climate change to race relations and the rule of law. No, it's just consistently making things more broken. And that has implications for how do we understand what the nature of the forces are at work. When we can see that there's an alliance that's been formed, and we can trace back white supremacy, and we trace back corporate greed, and we can see the evolution over time from the 19th century to our times when the two have joined forces under one party's tent. That may have been the dangerous moment in American history. It may have been that so long as you had white supremacy in one major party and you had corporate greed having a major say in the behavior of the other major party, and then when you get both of them under the same partisan tent because the white supremacy force felt betrayed by their party when it signed civil rights legislation and essentially outlawed their social system of racial tyranny. Then you had two major forces of brokenness driving one party. And thanks to the failure of the other big political force to see things whole and to respond effectively to this that the Republican Party and corporate America and the well of white racism and all the rest that were coming together, and a certain kind of Christian nationalism represented by Falwell and company, who are just fully into power and hypocrisy, all coming together under one tent. And the failure of the force under the other tent to recognize what they were up against because they weren't seeing things whole. Well, please, if you want to see things whole in that respect, there's a wealth of stuff. I've just been churning things out to try to illuminate things since 2005. I wrote a couple thousand pieces, and I put out op-eds every week as messages to the conservatives I live among. And then there's the big picture I lay out in a lot of different ways to try to show. It doesn't explain everything, but it shows some important things about some very fundamental realities of our situation and our story as Homo sapiens, the civilization creating creature, the one form of life that broke out of the biologically evolved system and broke into a dangerous situation, which we've been struggling to cope with for 10,000 years. Okay, I hope that you're interested and we'll check it out. I hope there is a market. I think that seeing things whole is a trip and actually kind of fulfilling, worth the work, that's my view, but I also think that strategically it's a necessity. If the side that's working so that the force of wholeness and not the force of brokenness prevails in this ongoing battle, we would fortify the forces of wholeness to the extent to which we can enter into some pretty illuminating understanding of the nature of the situation we find ourselves in and how we got there and who we are as creatures. A betterhumanstory.org. Thank you.